My name is Lillian Quinn, and I used to think silence kept me safe. But that illusion shattered the day I opened the grand mahogany door to my own mansion, holding a porcelain teapot, and watched my sister Jenna's jaw drop in slow motion. She had just spent the last year mocking me for still renting. I didn't say a word. I just smiled and poured her tea at the marble kitchen island she never imagined belonged to me. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. And if you've ever swallowed pain just to keep the peace, stay with me. This story is for you. It began in a graveyard. The cold had a wet, sharp edge that slid down the back of my neck as I stood beside the casket. The October rain hadn't let up once, as if the sky itself couldn't hold back its grief even when I could. The crowd was small, family, some of Dad's old coworkers, a few gray-suited men from his Masonic lodge. But I felt alone in the middle of them all. I didn't wear black. I wore charcoal gray, the color of ash of things that had burned down long ago. Mom stood beside me, a statue of disapproval in a tailored coat and lipstick that somehow hadn't smudged. Her words were quiet but barbed. He always bobbied you, right up until the end. My throat tightened. I looked straight ahead, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Jenna, my older sister by 2 years and self-declared queen of practical life choices, stood behind us with her husband clutching an umbrella over her like a trophy. She leaned forward just enough to let her voice carry. "Good luck paying rent this month, Lil," she said sweetly, loud enough for the couple behind us to flinch. I bit down so hard on the inside of my cheek that I tasted blood. I wouldn't give them the tears. Not here. Not in front of everyone. Not even for him. Not even for Dad. My fingers clenched tighter around the little bouquet I had brought. Not roses. Hydrangeas, blue like the tie he wore when he taught me how to drive. I knelt slowly and placed the flowers on the coffin's lacquered lid. "I'm okay, Dad," I whispered, so low only the soil beneath us heard. "Even if they don't know it yet." As I stood, a gust of wind caught my coat and snapped it open, and for a brief second I saw the glint of my watch, a gift from a CEO I once redesigned a product line for. It wasn't flashy, just high quality and subtle, like me. My mother's eyes caught the glint and narrowed, but she said nothing. The priest continued the rites as rain pooled on the tops of polished shoes and umbrellas shifted in the breeze. I barely heard the words. My pulse was roaring in my ears. "Do not let your hearts be troubled," but mine was. I wanted to scream, to cry, to punch the mud. Instead, I stayed still, because dignity was the only thing they couldn't take from me. Jenna leaned close one more time as the crowd began to disperse. "You'll probably be back in Mom's guest room by Christmas," she said. "Just don't expect her to cook." I turned slowly toward her, my eyes dry and sharp. "I'm not hungry," I said evenly. "Not for what either of you serve." Her mouth twitched, surprised ID answered, but she still looked smug. "You've always been too sensitive," Mom added, brushing past me toward the waiting town car. "That's why you'll never last out there." I watched their backs disappear through the mist and bone-gray sky. My fingers, still clenched around the soggy funeral program, trembled. They didn't know what I was building, not yet. But someday they'd walk into a room they assumed I didn't belong in and realize it was mine. The funeral was over, but the real performance was just beginning. Back at the old stone colonial in Ardmore, my childhood home turned psychological minefield. The air inside was just as cold as it had been at the cemetery, minus the rain. The heat was technically on, but it never seemed to reach the rooms that mattered. Especially not the kitchen, where all the warmth had been replaced with judgment and canned sympathy. Jenna had kicked off her boots the moment we stepped in and was now holding court in the living room, balancing a wine glass with one hand and her husband's knee with the other. I stayed near the doorway, still damp from the rain, a paper plate of potato salad growing limp in my hand. "So glad we decided not to bury Dad next to Grandma Irene," Jenna was saying to cousin Dana. "That cemetery's practically underwater, not chic. No one wants a swamp funeral." Dana gave an awkward chuckle. I slipped into the kitchen, hoping to find a quiet corner where no one needed me to comment on weather, coffin color, or casserole. But even the kitchen, the one room ID once claimed as safe, was no refuge. I heard them before they saw me. "She just never got it together the way Jenna did," Mom was saying, her voice low but pointed. "Lillian always chased ideas." "Ideas," Aunt Kathy echoed, amused. Mom sighed like she was enduring a burden. She's still in some rental apartment in, where is it again? That industrial part of town. Manyunk, Kathy supplied. Yes, that, all she talks about is user experience and product strategy like that means anything to people with real jobs. Jenna's already talking about buying a second property. She's always had that practical mind. The laughter was soft and sharp like clinking silverware. I stood frozen by the pantry, my heart thudding in my ears. They hadn't seen me. Or maybe they had and didn't care. Both hurt. I turned on my heel, stepped back into the hallway, and reached for my phone as if it had just buzzed. Sorry, I murmured to no one in particular. Work call. No one asked questions. Why would they? To them, I was the flake, the dreamer, the wandering soul who needed excuses to avoid family. I stepped outside into the gray twilight and walked a few paces down the stone path, just far enough that I could breathe. The damp air clung to my skin, but I didn't care. My phone hadn't buzzed. No one was calling, I just couldn't take another second in that kitchen. User experience, I muttered bitterly, mimicking my mother's tone. Like that means anything. I wanted to scream. It means I redesign systems so people don't throw their phones out the window. It means I make more money than Jenna and her husband combined. But I wouldn't, because that wasn't the plan. The plan was to keep my head down, to work in silence, to let them keep thinking they knew who I was, and then one day show them they didn't know me at all. I stared out at the wet lawn, the overgrown shrubs Jenna had once blamed on me during a summer we were grounded together. It was always easier to cast me as the messy one, the impractical one, because then they didn't have to reckon with the truth. The truth was, I was the one who had survived. Not just Dad's death, but years of being minimized, criticized, and quietly dismissed. The truth was, I was the one who'd found a way out, even if they couldn't see it. And I wasn't going to shatter that illusion just yet. I walked back inside, calm and blank-faced. Jenna caught my eye as I passed through the living room again. You missed Dana's story about her neighbor's funeral mix-up, she said, smiling sweetly. Honestly, it's probably good. You never liked people's stories. I looked at her. At the way she held her glass, pinky slightly raised. At the way our mother beamed at her like a mirror held just right. No, I said softly. Not the kind you tell anyway. She tilted her head, a little frown forming, but I didn't stop. I walked straight to the front door. Where are you going? Mom called after me. I have a deadline, I said without turning. Work stuff. I heard Jenna mutter, of course she does. But I didn't care. My mind was already turning. They wanted to believe I was failing. Let them. They wanted to believe I couldn't afford a house. Perfect. They'd see the truth soon enough, and not through a spreadsheet or a lecture. No, they'd see it when they walked through my front gate, into a life they never thought I could build. And when that day came, I wouldn't need to explain a single thing. I'd just pour the tea and let the walls do the talking. The smell of cold takeout and burned coffee became the scent of my sanctuary. My apartment, wedged between a tattoo parlor and a dusty antique store in Roxborough, was small, barely 800 square feet, but it had something no one in my family ever offered me: peace. Here, no one rolled their eyes when I talked about tech. No one mocked me for dreaming too big or too long. There were no murmured jabs over breakfast, no tight-lipped scoffs from Jenna across the dinner table. Just me, my laptop, and the quiet hum of possibility. The first Monday after Dad's funeral, I walked into my office at Aerotech, the software firm where I'd been a mid-level product strategist for 4 years, and asked to take on 3 new accounts. No one asked why. They assumed grief made me restless. Maybe it did. But it also made me ruthless, with my time, my energy, my patience. While my coworkers clocked out at 6, I stayed behind. While they unplugged for weekends, I poured another cup of coffee and whispered to myself, just a little longer. I had a spreadsheet taped above my desk titled Runway to Freedom. No one knew what it meant. They thought I was quirky, driven, a little intense. They didn't know I had a goal, a product prototype of my own, a pitch deck I was refining like gospel, and a vision I wasn't going to explain until it was undeniable. I missed birthdays, declined happy hours, lived on granola bars and microwave dumplings. I let them all think I was simply hustling. What I was doing was building my exit. I only saw my family twice that year. Once, at Thanksgiving, where Jenna updated everyone on her new position in mortgage banking while calling me still in tech, doing that user stuff. And once at Easter, where Mom gifted her a monogrammed leather planner and said to me, maybe you'll get one too, once you've got clients. I smiled politely. They never asked what I was really doing. Not once. And I never volunteered, because silence is more powerful than anyone thinks when you're the one holding the truth. It was on a humid July evening, at a rooftop bar in Center City, that everything changed. A team dinner, semi-mandatory. I almost skipped it but forced myself into a blazer and heels, and told myself champagne would taste better when you'd earned it. The sunset was painting the skyline in bruised orange and gold. My coworkers buzzed around tall glasses and tiny sliders, laughing about app glitches and awkward client calls. I stood near the railing, letting the breeze cool the back of my neck. Then Greg, my boss, a decent man with a weak spot for soft pretzels and brutal deadlines, clinked his glass. "I want to raise a toast," he said, "to someone who's taken every chaotic project this year and spun it into gold. Lillian Quinn, you've earned this. Everyone, meet our new VP of Product." My team erupted in cheers. Someone popped a bottle too early and champagne foamed over the edge like a celebration that couldn't wait. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. I smiled. Greg turned to me. "Say a few words." I took the glass, held it just long enough for the fizz to settle, and said quietly, "Thanks, I've been working on something." That was all, because it wasn't about the title. It was about what the title bought me: space, authority, confidence, and enough capital to finally launch what I'd been planning. That night, as the team danced and drank and took blurry photos of the skyline, I slipped away early, riding the elevator down with a half-empty glass and a full heart. Back at my apartment, I kicked off my heels, changed into my threadbare hoodie, and opened my laptop. I uploaded my beta prototype to a private server. Then I whispered my nightly mantra one last time, but this time, I smiled while saying it. Just a little longer. The day my entire life changed was quiet. No confetti. No champagne corks. No marching band to signal I'd crossed some invisible threshold into the kind of success that used to feel mythical. There was just me, a pen, and a stack of closing documents so thick the lawyer joked we should charge the paper's rent. The office was in Old City, nestled between a vegan bagel shop and an art gallery that hadn't opened on time in 3 years. Floor-to-ceiling windows let the low winter sun spill across the polished walnut conference table. Outside, the January chill bit at the cobblestones, but inside I was warm, not just from the heater, from the knowledge that I'd done it. I'd built something real, and someone had paid a ridiculous amount of money to own it. I sat across from two suits from Pendrax Solutions, the kind of men who talked in acronyms and only smiled when lawyers did. They didn't know I'd built my platform on a folding table in a studio apartment. Didn't know I'd pulled 3 a.m. debugging sessions after 12-hour workdays, or that I'd funded the entire beta test on my savings and skipped groceries to afford UX testers. All they knew was that my product worked. It was sleek, scalable, and exactly the kind of acquisition that made them look brilliant to their shareholders. We shook hands. They slid the final page across. "Congratulations, Ms. Quinn," the taller one said, trying to sound casual. "Quite the exit for someone who was under the radar." I smiled and signed my name. That's kind of the point. By 3 p.m. it was done. Just like that, I wasn't Lillian Quinn the renter anymore. I was Lillian Quinn, founder of QURE, a cleantech AI interface that now had a new parent company and a 7-figure price tag attached to its name. I didn't text anyone right away. I didn't post. I didn't even call Marla yet. I just walked slowly through the cobbled streets, letting the cold sting my cheeks and the truth sink in. No more mantras, no more just a little longer. I had arrived. Later that evening I met Marla, my best friend since our Temple University days, at a quiet little bistro in Rittenhouse. She'd always known I was up to something, but I'd played it close. She had a flair for tick-tock and spilling tea, and I needed this off the grid. "So," she said after we'd ordered, narrowing her eyes over her wine glass, "you're glowing. What happened? New man or new money?" I took a bite of bread and kept her guessing just long enough for her to kick my shin under the table. "I closed a deal today," I said finally. "Pendrax bought the product I've been developing." Marla blinked. "Wait, bought it?" I nodded. "Like for equity?" "Nope, full buyout, cash and stock." She leaned in, her earrings catching the candlelight. "Lillian Quinn. Are you telling me," she lowered her voice, "that you're rich?" I grinned and shrugged. "I'm telling you we're splitting dessert," she nearly screamed. "You better be joking." I just raised my glass, to patience. She laughed, blinking fast, and leaned back in her chair, shaking her head. Girl, she whispered, you're rich. I said nothing for a long second then. Let's keep it between us. Because I already knew what I was going to do next, and it needed to stay quiet. 2 hours later, I was home in my apartment, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside my old radiator with a laptop perched on a cardboard box I never unpacked. The building creaked with its usual winter groans. The wallpaper still peeled above the window. The heater choked like it might give up altogether. But I didn't care. Because on my screen was the listing I'd saved 6 months ago. A 5,400 square foot stone mansion in Chestnut Hill. Ivy-covered, slate-roofed, with a garden that curled like a secret around the back. French doors, a butler's pantry, a sunroom with pale blue tiles that reminded me of the hydrangeas I'd left on Dad's casket. That house had stayed on the market longer than expected. Too big for families, too old for developers, too much upkeep for retirees. Perfect for me. I opened the encrypted file containing the routing info from my deal, then drafted an anonymous all-cash offer at full asking price, plus enough over to make the seller stop thinking and start signing. It was 3:42 a.m. when the confirmation email pinged my inbox. Offer accepted. I closed the laptop and sat back against the radiator. Somewhere, Jenna was probably dreaming about backsplash tile for her condo, and my mother was likely rewriting a mental grocery list with coupons. Neither of them knew what I'd just done, and I wasn't about to tell them. Not yet. Let them keep thinking I was renting. Let them believe I was chasing dreams. I didn't just buy a house. I bought the board they'd been playing their power games on. And soon, I'd invite them to tea. 3 weeks after I bought the mansion, I was sitting in my mother's kitchen again. Same faded floral curtains, same chipped mug with world's best cook ironically lying on the side. I hadn't told her anything. Not about the promotion. Not about the deal. And definitely not about the house. She still believed I was in my little rental above that bar with the noise, and I didn't correct her. Some truths deserve to arrive wearing heels. I just don't understand why you're dragging your feet, she said, slicing into a bruised pear and dropping it into a chipped bowl. You're 32. Isn't it time to plant roots? Or are you still in that phase where you think freedom means poverty? I stirred my coffee slowly, letting the swirl of cream give me something to look at besides her eyes. I'm not ready to buy, I said. Still thinking about what I want. Typical, she muttered. Jenna knew at 26. Right on cue, Jenna swept into the room carrying a bag of sourdough rolls like she was delivering sacred offerings. Her coat was open, hair curled, sunglasses pushed into her perfectly smooth headband. She beamed, kissed Mom on the cheek, and turned to me with that same old glittery condescension. I brought the good kind, she said. Don't worry, Lil, I made sure there was one for you. Oh, I said lightly. Thanks, Mom clapped her hands. Sit, both of you, let's have a little celebration. For what? I asked, sipping my now cooling coffee. Jenna flashed her manicured fingers. My offer was accepted. I got the house in Devon. 3 beds, 2.5 baths, open concept everything. Built-in wine fridge, you're going to die when you see the closet. That's wonderful, I said, smiling. Congratulations. Thanks, she said, tossing her hair. And once I'm settled, maybe you can finally say you've been inside a real house. She laughed at her own joke and turned to Mom, who chuckled along. I just stirred my coffee again. The mug was one of Mom's old ones, faded from the dishwasher, a tiny chip on the handle, familiar and unremarkable. Of course, I said gently, I'd love to help you settle in. Jenna looked mildly surprised. Really, she said, that's sweet of you. I can help with boxes, maybe flowers for the entryway. You know I've got a good eye for welcoming spaces. I do remember that, Mom said, still slicing fruit. You always loved making forts when you were little. You never really grew out of that, did you? I kept smiling. I guess not. They moved on to talking about furniture financing, paint swatches, and whether Jenna should go with white oak or hickory floors. I sat quietly, nodding at the right moments. They had no idea the marble floors in my new foyer had just been polished that morning, or that the contractor I'd hired was redoing the sunroom with custom cabinetry and French doors that would open into a garden Jenna once said, no one under 6 figures should even look at. It didn't matter. Not yet. Because when I did show them, it wasn't going to be in words. It would be in square footage, in silence, in the echo of their heels across my stone floors. The townhouse smelled like fresh paint and lemon pledge, the scent of beginnings with just a hint of strain. It was Saturday morning and I showed up exactly at 10:00 a.m. like Jenna had asked. Not early, not late, just punctual enough to be helpful without appearing eager. I wore jeans and a navy hoodie, hair pulled into a low ponytail, and I carried a box of lemon raspberry cupcakes from a bakery in Chestnut Hill that Jenna had once said was pretentious and overpriced. I brought them anyway. "Hey," I said as Jenna opened the front door. She looked mildly surprised, probably expecting me to flake. "Hey, you didn't have to bring anything." "I wanted to," I replied simply, stepping inside. "Congrats again." The place was bright. Blonde wood floors, white quartz counters, staging furniture still in place while she waited for her own to arrive. It had that clean, neutral personality that made the Zillow photos pop but didn't say much about the person moving in. "You can just set those cupcakes on the counter," Jenna said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Mom's in the back unpacking throw pillows." I smiled and followed her in, pausing to take in the layout. The open-concept living space flowed into a narrow kitchen with high-end hardware. New, pretty, predictable. "I brought a couple boxes from the car," I said. "Want them upstairs?" Jenna nodded. "That'd be great. The guest room's the first door on the right." When I returned with the boxes, marked books in her tidy handwriting, our mother was standing at the kitchen island, folding a dish rag and looking completely in her element. "Lillian," she said, not looking up. "You've always been good at these little chores. It's your role, really, the helper." She said it like she was complimenting me. I just smiled faintly. Happy to be useful. She still hadn't looked up. She didn't notice the box of gourmet cupcakes or the bouquet of white tulips I'd placed gently in a vase by the sink. "Jenna," she called over her shoulder, "did you say you're going with the linen drapes for the guest room or the pale blue?" "Linen," Jenna answered, walking past me with a roll of contact paper in hand. "Blue felt too cold." I nodded thoughtfully. "Smart." They didn't ask me what I thought of the house. They didn't ask me about my place or my job or anything at all, so I didn't offer. Instead, while they busied themselves with bubble wrap and drawer liners, I quietly opened the cabinet beside the stove, then the one above the fridge, and finally the drawer near the sink labeled "Move-in Funds." A cute little sticker Jenna must have made with her label maker. Inside were 320s and a few receipts. I reached into the pocket of my hoodie, pulled out a plain white envelope, and slid it in. $1,000 cash. No note, no signature. Just help the way I always gave it, silently, invisibly. Jenna wouldn't find it until later. She'd either roll her eyes or take it without comment. Maybe both. But I didn't do it for thanks or recognition. I did it because I could. Because I remembered every time I'd been humiliated over money, and I knew, truly knew, that the most powerful thing you can do when someone underestimates you is help them anyway. Later, as I tied up the trash and offered to run out for coffee, Mom gave me a tight smile. "You really do thrive in support roles," she said, nodding like it was fact. I met her gaze, warm but unreadable. "Well," I said softly, "someone has to hold up the frame while everyone else hangs their pictures." She blinked, as if unsure whether I'd complimented or insulted her. Then Jenna called from upstairs and the moment passed. I slipped out a few minutes later, saying I had a work thing, which was true in the loosest sense. I had calls scheduled with the design firm I'd hired to reimagine the entryway of the mansion. As I drove away, the house shrinking in the rearview mirror, I realized something that startled me with its quiet truth. They still thought I was behind. They had no idea I'd already passed them. Jenna's housewarming was the kind of party that looked more expensive than it actually was. Charcuterie boards from Trader Joe's arranged like they'd come from a boutique caterer. A playlist curated for people who wanted to feel cultured but not challenged. And paper napkins printed with gold foil that read "Welcome Home." I arrived 10 minutes late on purpose. Not too late to draw attention. Just enough to avoid the awkward silence that always followed me into a room full of family. The townhouse was full. Coworkers from Jenna's firm, a few neighbors, college friends I hadn't seen in years. Everyone sipped sparkling wine and commented on the backsplash or the amazing light in the living room. I wore a soft green sweater and black jeans, nothing flashy, just polished enough to be forgettable. "Lillian," Jenna spotted me as I stepped inside. She gave me a half hug, careful not to smudge her makeup. "Glad you made it." Wouldn't miss it, I said, handing her a slim white box with a ribbon. What's this? Hand-poured soy candles from a place in MT, Airy, I said. One's garden mint, the other's sandalwood rose. Oh, she said, turning the box in her hands. How thoughtful. She moved it to the sideboard like she was filing paperwork. No one else saw it, but I did. Mom swooped in a few minutes later, dressed in what she called casual upscale, a cream blouse with pearl buttons and slacks that had never met a wrinkle. Well, this is just lovely, she said, loud enough for the room to hear. Own place, Jenna, you finally made it, sweetheart. She raised her glass, eyes sweeping across the guests. Unlike some people, she added with a smile that almost passed as innocent. The chuckles that followed were soft but very real. I stood perfectly still, cheeks warming but spine straight. Jenna chimed in, tipping her glass toward me with that familiar smirk. At least I'm not still renting like some sad soul. My fingers curled slightly around my wineglass. Don't react, don't give them anything. I took a sip, smiling just enough to signal ease. A little jealousy's healthy, right? I said brightly. Keeps things interesting. A few people laughed politely. Jenna's smirk faltered for half a second before she turned to refill someone's drink. I wandered to the corner of the room, pretending to examine a framed print of a watercolor skyline. It was crooked. Marla, who'd come late and hung back like a social observer, found me near the kitchen. Are you okay? She asked under her breath, eyes flicking to Jenna across the room. I'm fine, I said. Really? She gave me a look. The kind that meant I know you're not. The kind only a best friend can give you in a room where no one else sees the knives. They don't know, she whispered. They still think you're behind. I know. And you're just letting them mock you. I took another sip and smiled. Not for much longer. A few minutes later, Jenna's coworker Andrew asked me where I lived, and I repeated the usual line. Still in my place near Manyunk. Small, but rent's good. Not ready to buy yet. He nodded, none the wiser. Because this wasn't the time. This was the scene before the curtain rises. I stayed for another 20 minutes, just long enough to help refill the chips and straighten the crooked painting when no one was looking. Then I said I had a work meeting early and slipped out quietly, walking alone down the chilly suburban sidewalk, the echo of laughter and low-grade cruelty still fading behind me. They thought the joke was still on me, but they'd learned soon enough I wasn't the punchline. I was the setup. The text came at 9:12 a.m., just as I was folding a linen napkin into a soft triangle for the place setting. JNNA, LOL still not interested in renting tea rooms but THX for invite, I read it once. Then again. Then a third time as if repetition might somehow smooth the condescension out of her tone. It didn't. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over 1,000 different replies, none of which would have made a dent in her smugness. Not the kind of smug that came from facts, but the kind that came from the false safety of underestimating someone. She thought I'd invited her to some cafe. She thought the address I'd texted was another little rental in another creative part of the city, probably with string lights and IKEA mugs and a wobbly chair or two. She had no idea. I locked the phone and laid it gently on the countertop, Italian marble, veined with the soft grays and pale creams that reminded me of early morning fog. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon polish and peonies. The flowers were fresh, cut that morning and arranged in a simple glass vase. No overdone bows, no dramatic flair, just quiet elegance like everything else here. The house had finally come to life, my life. The custom gold fixtures gleamed in the under-cabinet lighting. The floor-to-ceiling windows let in winter sun like it had been summoned just for this house. And the teapot, a porcelain one my father had given me the year I graduated, sat on the stove, clean and waiting. I took a deep breath and whispered to the quiet, "Oh, you'll want to drink tea at this one." Because this wasn't just a house. It was a reckoning. The invitation I'd sent Jenna the night before had been deliberate. No pretense, no explanation, just my name and address and the words, "Drop by sometime." I've got lemon scones cooling. I'd even made the scones just in case. Warm, buttery, with flecks of zest and a drizzle of sugar glaze that would catch the light just so. I wanted her to come. I wanted her to see. Not because I needed her approval, but because I needed her silence. That stunned, unblinking silence people give when they walk into a place they were sure you couldn't afford, a place they assumed you'd never belong. The kind of silence that replaces every insult, every dig, every still renting, with the thud of reality hitting the floor. The kind you can't fake. I didn't reply to her text. I didn't need to, she'd come eventually. Curiosity always outweighs contempt. And when she did, I'd be waiting. In my house, at my table with the tea already steeping. The gate buzzer rang on a windless Tuesday morning, breaking the stillness that had settled over the house like velvet. I was in the sunroom, a book open on my lap, though I hadn't turned the page in 15 minutes. Something had told me today would be the day. I'd baked fresh scones that morning, same recipe, more zest, and left the tea steeping as always, just in case. When the intercom crackled to life, I didn't flinch. Lillian, hey, it's Jenna. I was nearby and figured I'd, see your apartment. Even through the grainy audio, I could hear the hesitation, the forced casualness. The way her voice curled upward at apartment, like she was trying to make it sound small. Like she still believed it could be. I pressed the button, calm and clear. Come on in, I made lemon scones. Silence for half a beat. Then a mumbled, okay. I watched from the window as the wrought iron gates creaked open on command, the motor humming softly beneath their weight. And there she was. Jenna's sleek silver SUV crept through slowly, like she wasn't sure she had the right address. Her head tilted slightly as she passed the hedges, her brows drawn low. She hadn't even made it halfway up the driveway, and I could already feel the wheels in her brain grinding against the facts. This wasn't a unit. This wasn't a walk-up. This was a home designed to hush people into reverence. 3 stories of ivy-covered stone rose before her, stoic and unapologetic. Leaded glass windows gleamed in the winter sun. The circular drive wrapped neatly around a fountain that still ran, even in January, because I paid the contractor extra to install a heated base. She pulled to a stop and just sat there for a second, her hand still on the gear shift. I stayed where I was, framed in the front doorway, a soft ivory blouse tucked into dark jeans, hair down, no shoes, just grounded and quiet. She finally stepped out, smoothing her jacket like it would somehow protect her from what she was seeing. Is this? She started, walking toward the front steps slowly, like she didn't trust them not to vanish beneath her. This is where I live, I said gently. Been here a few months. Her eyes bounced from the arched windows to the black lacquered door, then to the polished brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. But you said. I know what I said, I replied. I was letting things settle. The word settle seemed to land somewhere between her collarbones and knock the breath out of her. I stepped aside, letting the door swing open wider. Come in. The scones are still warm. She blinked once, then crossed the threshold. I watched her cross into my world, her boots clicking softly against the herringbone oak floor. Her gaze darted across the vaulted ceiling, the crown molding, the soft light that fell through the skylight and hit the marble island like a spotlight. Her breath caught when she saw the flowers in the center of the kitchen, pale pink peonies, fresh cut and opened wide, resting in a crystal vase that once belonged to our grandmother. She didn't speak. I poured tea into delicate bone-white cups and placed a scone on a small porcelain plate in front of her. She sat stiffly at the island, eyes still trailing along the outlines of everything she hadn't imagined I could have. Cream? I asked, voice even. She shook her head, speechless for the first time in years. I stirred mine quietly, the spoon clinking gently against the cup. Then I smiled, soft and unwavering. I guess it photographs small, I said. Jenna didn't even make it past the foyer before she backed out again. I'd barely finished setting the second teacup when I heard the sharp click of her heels against the slate front steps. Then nothing, a pause, a shift, her footsteps reversed. I followed quietly to the front door, careful not to let the teapot slosh. From the entryway window, I saw her standing at the edge of the driveway with her phone clutched in both hands like a life raft. She was pacing, mouth moving fast. I cracked the door just enough to catch the words. No, Mom, listen to me, you have to come right now. No, don't stop for gas, just get in the car and drive. I swear to God you won't believe this. A beat of silence. Then sharper, she owns it, this house, it's hers. Jenna's voice cracked at the end, like saying it out loud fractured something internal. I stepped fully into the doorway, letting the light from the chandelier spill across the entry behind me, painting the space in a warm gold that looked like something out of a catalog. She turned, startled, and blinked at me from the foot of the drive. I held the teapot in both hands, steady and quiet. Everything okay? I asked. She stared at me like I was someone else entirely. Maybe I was. You really live here? Her voice was hushed now, awe-threaded with confusion. This is yours. nodded slowly, every square inch. But how, T.S. getting cold, I said gently and turned back inside, leaving the door open behind me. The footsteps didn't come immediately. I imagined her standing there, processing the ivy on the walls, the symmetry of the hedges, the fact that the gate had her name logged as a visitor, not a resident. I didn't need to turn around to know she'd follow. Not this time. 10 minutes passed, maybe less. Then the buzzer rang again. I pressed the intercom. It's me. Mom's voice, clipped and skeptical. I was told there's been some misunderstanding. I smiled, letting the button go. Come on in, I said. You'll want to see this for yourself. The gates opened with a smooth whir, the kind that only well-maintained motors can manage. I watched from the front window as Mom's sedan pulled in fast, like she thought urgency might change what she was about to see. She stepped out of the car before it stopped fully, still adjusting her coat. Where's Jenna? She snapped, eyes scanning the porch. She's inside, I called from the doorway. Her gaze shifted upward, past me, past the glowing chandelier, past the massive front door that looked like it belonged in a museum. Then it dropped back down to me, to the teapot I still held, to the quiet smile on my face. She took one step up, then another. Is this a rental? She asked, voice lower now. No, her eyes narrowed. A friend's house. Nope. Then what? I stepped back and opened the door wider. Welcome to my home. The words sat between us like a thrown gauntlet, but there was no malice in my tone, just calm truth, the kind of truth that didn't need to raise its voice to be heard. She hesitated, just long enough for the air to shift. Then Jenna appeared at the end of the hall, still holding her teacup. She looked shell-shocked, like she'd wandered into a scene she couldn't make sense of. Mom, she said breathlessly, it's real, it's all hers. Mom's eyes moved from Jenna to the crown molding above my head to the framed oil painting behind me, then finally to me, but she said nothing. And in that silence I found something I hadn't expected. Not vindication, not triumph, just peace. I turned toward the kitchen, letting the soft clink of the teapot against porcelain fill the air. You still take cream, right? I asked over my shoulder. No answer, only footsteps. Soft, reluctant, disbelieving footsteps entering the space they once said I'd never have. The front door hadn't even finished closing behind Mom when she stopped. Completely. Her heels clicked once on the marble, then no more. She stood there, breath catching in her throat, eyes traveling up the sweeping staircase, along the chandelier's crystal ribs, across the oil paintings and the vaulted ceiling that seemed to lift higher the longer she stared. This, she whispered. This is. Jenna rushed in behind her, hands shaking. Mom, she blurted, you told us she was broke. The words landed like a slap. I didn't flinch. I lifted my cup, took a small sip of tea and set it back down on the saucer with a soft, deliberate sound. I never said that, I replied calmly. You assumed. Mom turned to me slowly. You told me you were renting. I told you I wasn't ready to buy, I corrected. Those aren't the same thing. Jenna's voice cracked. But you let us think. I let you think whatever you wanted, I said. I never lied. The silence stretched. Mom's face shifted, color draining, then returning too fast. How long? She demanded. A while. How long? She repeated, sharper. Long enough to learn who I was without your opinions. Jenna sank onto the edge of a velvet chair, staring at the floor. You let us mock you, she said weakly. You let Mom humiliate you. Why? I met her eyes. Because I needed to know if you'd ever stop. Neither of them answered. Mom's shoulders slumped, something brittle finally cracking through her rigid posture. We were afraid of you, she said suddenly, voice trembling. Do you know that? Jenna looked up, startled. Mom, no, she went on, eyes still on me. We always were. You were just like your father, quiet, observant, always reaching higher. We couldn't control you. The words hit harder than any insult they'd ever thrown. We can't control something, Jenna added softly. We make it small. I felt something loosen in my chest, not anger, understanding. So you called me impractical, I said. Unstable, a dreamer, Mom swallowed. It was easier than admitting you were stronger. I stood, smoothing the fabric of my blouse and walked toward them. Each step echoed. I didn't build this to hurt you, I said. I built it because I deserved it. Jenna's eyes filled. We thought you needed us. I shook my head gently. Needed to need me. They had no answer for that. I lifted the teapot and poured, the steam rising between us like a quiet curtain call. Tea, I asked. And for the first time in my life, they looked at me not as the lesser daughter, but as the woman they had underestimated. The camellias were just starting to bloom when we sat down at the stone table in the back garden, me, Jenna, and Mom. It was late morning, early spring, the kind of day that made everything feel quieter than it really was. Soft breeze, filtered sunlight, a rustle of branches high above us like the house was holding its breath. The garden had taken shape faster than I expected. I'd hired a landscaping team the day after our showdown in the foyer, and for once, I let myself choose beauty first. Winding paths, climbing roses, and two perfectly placed benches that made it feel like a secret someone would be lucky to stumble upon. Now, we sipped coffee from matching cups while a hummingbird hovered by the wisteria. I'd made banana bread from scratch. Jenna had brought a folder of work contracts. Mom had brought her reading glasses and a legal pad labeled pension questions in her careful, no-nonsense script. They didn't call me helper anymore. They called me by my name. Jenna tapped her pen against the glass tabletop and leaned back with a sigh. My team just got reassigned again, she said. New supervisor from New York, we'll see how long he lasts. You thinking of switching firms? I asked, reaching for the sugar bowl. Maybe, she admitted. I've been putting out feelers. You were right about that resume revision. Got more bites in 2 weeks than the last 6 months combined. I nodded once, no smugness, just calm. Mom, seated between us, adjusted her glasses and glanced at her notes. I need to talk to someone at the pension board about my rollover, she said. And those annual statements, they've been sending duplicates. I can connect you with someone at Astra, I offered. Their retirement accounts team is solid. She paused, then, that would be helpful, thank you. Simple, direct, no sarcasm. It almost startled me. For a long time we just sat there, the sound of wind chimes and distant traffic filling in the pauses. Then Jenna looked at me, her voice low and strangely soft. What do you think Dad would say about all this? I set my cup down gently. The question didn't sting, not anymore. I looked around at the garden, the sunlight dancing on the rim of Mom's glasses, the warmth of the seat beneath me that I'd earned with years of silence and strategy. I smiled. He'd say I did okay, I said, and finally stopped hiding. They both nodded, slow and quiet, like they were taking it in, not just hearing but learning. The old patterns hadn't disappeared completely, but they had softened. We reshuffled the roles. And I wasn't the underdog anymore. I was the one who built the table we now shared. The cemetery looked different now. Same hill, same quiet row beneath the oaks. But the air felt warmer. Not just because it was spring again, but because I no longer came here carrying shame. I parked beneath the same tree where I'd stood in the rain a year earlier, holding hydrangeas and swallowing humiliation. This time there was no storm, no mother's sneer, no sister's echo of a cruel joke. Just birdsong and soft light drifting through branches overhead. I walked the path slowly, heels crunching against the gravel, one hand gripping a slim envelope, the other tucked into the pocket of my trench coat. It had been exactly 12 months since the funeral, and everything had changed. Dad's grave was near the back, tucked beside a stone wall covered in ivy. His headstone was modest, his name carved cleanly, nothing dramatic. But today, I had something to leave him. I knelt beside the grass, took the envelope from my coat, and slid the folded newspaper out. Philadelphia Tribune, Sunday edition. A full-page feature with a bold headline, Lillian Quinn to deliver keynote at National Tech Summit, a voice redefining leadership in innovation. There was a photo me mid-speech from a panel the month before, blazer sharp, expression focused, hands caught mid-gesture. The article detailed my journey, my product, and my vision for tech that didn't just scale but served people with dignity. I pressed the page flat, then gently placed it beside the base of the headstone, weighing it down with a smooth river stone I'd picked up from my own garden that morning. "Hi, Dad," I said softly. "Thought you might want to see this." The breeze shifted, stirring the edge of the paper. I smiled. "You were right to believe in me," I whispered. Not just in the moments I succeeded, but in the ones I hadn't yet. In the ones when I was still building in secret, still sitting at a hand-me-down desk, dreaming in silence. You believed before anyone else could see it. I stood, brushing off the knees of my slacks. The house was still mine, the company still growing. Jenna and Mom still in my life, less sharp now, less sure of their version of the world. We weren't perfect, but we were real, and I had found my center. I looked down one last time at the stone and the paper. Then I turned, straightened my shoulders, and walked toward the path. The sun was warm against my back, and the city skyline blinked faintly in the distance. At the edge of the cemetery, I paused, one hand on the gate. I finally believe in me too, I said aloud. And then I walked forward. No rush, no fear, no need to explain, just a quiet certainty rising steady in my chest. This was my life now, and I had built every inch of it. That was the end of my story. I still think about the moment Jenna quietly accepted the envelope of money I left in her drawer. No thank you, no question, just silence. She could have refused it, or at least acknowledged it. Did she do the right thing? Tell me in the comments what you would have done in her place. And if my story meant something to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with me for the next one.